Issues related to gender have animated public discourse for the past several years. And of course, as with any scary change to our social fabric, churches have to weigh in and tell us why anything other than cis men and women is evil. What is interesting to me is there is very little biblical backing for any position related to gender. About having gay sexy times, there are a handful of verses, but anything related to gender at all, much less being trans in particular, it's very thin on the ground. And yet, from this light, poisonous gossamer, religions weave all kinds of reasons why having a different idea of your gender is a sin. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I'm an atheist and skeptic, and today I'm starting a series on one ministry's take on gender. The Biblical View on Transgender Identity, a primer for parents and strugglers, is on the Focus on the Family website. It is long, hence the series. People may wonder why I'm talking about issues related to gender on an atheist channel. Mainly, I see religious people speaking from a place of ignorance to dictate their terms about what everyone else should believe about gender. They speak with great authority and fuck-all expertise and muddy the discourse. They don't talk to healthcare professionals, mental health professionals, or even trans and non-binary folk at all. They pluck their one Bible verse and make a toxic jam with spoonfuls of preconceived notions and prejudices, cups of ignorance, a healthy dose of fear-mongering, and plenty of good old Christian love. This is the same science denial that fuels creationism and other anti-science beliefs. And really, it's all about control, about making sure people doubt their own experiences and what they mean and how they should represent them. And though I am not trans, I see the gender roles proposed by religion troubling, stifling, and a recipe for an unhealthy life no matter what your gender. People should be able to define their own identities, including how they relate and express their gender. Not everything on the Focus on the Family site is bad. I mean, they actually are a little more realistic than other sites, but plenty of it is, and the basis for their pontificating is as well, and can also be hidden in the text. And so that's what we want to uncover. Okay, that's the blibbity blab I have to start. Let's see what Focus on the Family says. One of the biggest misperceptions about Christianity is that it's simply about acting right. When Christian parents overemphasize their child's behavior rather than their heart, the real message they send often has more shame than love. As secular opinions continue to reject biblical standards, many Christians struggle to discern what their response should be to such hot-button topics as transgenderism. Well, first of all, it wouldn't be a hot-button topic if you didn't make it one. I mean, it might just be something that you go like, ooh, there's an interesting thing in the world, but I guess that would be too easy. And I guess my main question about this part is, do people really think that Christianity is about acting right? I cannot tell you how many times I see Christians say that the behavior doesn't matter, it is just what is in your heart. And I think no matter which one you emphasize, whether it's acting right or what is in a person's heart, the potential to send the message about shame is always there, because the accumulated amount of behavior that is bad means that you are a quote-unquote bad person and can create a cycle of shame. I guess this whole paragraph is actually about easing a reader into the topic and showing them that even though this isn't really a sinful action, it's a sinful part of the heart. And I think it contradicts what Christians usually say about gay people, where they say it's okay to be gay as long as you don't act on it. So what's in your heart, your attractions, we can acknowledge that, but you can't act on them. The reality is, when I want to control your behavior, I can go in whichever direction I want. Is it the heart or is it your actions? Who can tell with Christianity? It can be whichever one in any given circumstances based on what I want to convince you to do and be. Let's keep going and see what they say. The chasm between the biblical view of sexuality and the secular view grows wider every day. Social media and the entertainment industry now celebrate, quote, gender fluidity as a more enlightened way of thinking than the biblical view. The trend has grown quickly, with transgender-identified celebrities making headlines and drag queens leading story times at schools and libraries. Society faces unexpected legal and ethical challenges as transgender-identified people compete on sports teams and use public restrooms of their non-biological sex. Parents increasingly allow their underage children to chemically and surgically alter their bodies, and several states now permit minors to do so without their parents' consent. Oh my, that's a lot really packed into this one paragraph. So let's start with this chasm that's growing wider every day. Well, that's a little hyperbolic. A lot of this stuff has been around since humans have been around, and it's just you're becoming aware of it. But also, did you ever look at the sexuality that's actually depicted in the Bible? Have you looked at what your characters like Abraham and Lot and Noah and David actually do? It's not like this is like a great view of sexuality, but hey, consent and all that, I guess that's just overblown. I would like to point out that social media is more than just celebration of anything related to gender, including trans individuals. You can also find a lot of harassment and bullying on social media. It's a wide landscape out there. And sure, there are some areas in social media and in the entertainment industry where people celebrate gender fluidity and think it is something interesting and that there's nothing wrong with it. They're not actually caring about your biblical view, by the way. You're the one that cares about the biblical view, and you're the one that sees the conflict. Everybody else is just living their life. And it is true that there are some trans individuals and there are drag queens, and those are not the same thing at all. These are completely different things. By the way, transgender identified individual and this language, not really the correct vocabulary to use, but that's what religious people do because they want to act like this isn't really a valid identity. It's identifying. It's not God-based or something like that. It's true that we have some legal and ethical challenges, like how do we interact in a society where we have different opinions. The public restroom thing really should be a non-issue. I don't know why people make this such a big issue. Women's restrooms have stalls. You have all the privacy you want. You're not going to encounter whatever it is they think that you're going to encounter. And creeps are going to creep no matter what. You're not going to stop some asshole that just wants to go into the bathroom by saying like trans individuals can't use the public restroom that corresponds to their identity. It's just like that's stupid. I understand the issue about sports teams, although my study into these people competing on sports teams is that it's really overblown, especially when people are on the hormone therapy. But okay, we need to figure some of these things out as a society. There's a lot of things like that. I don't know why that's such a big deal. We start thinking about those things, we start to look at it. The fact that we face challenges of any kind just means that we have something to do. Fine. And then to wind up this paragraph about parents allowing their underage children to access gender-affirming care, well, isn't that what you want them to do? Isn't this all about parents' rights? Shouldn't parents be able to make decisions about their children? I mean, a lot of this is going to be about how children are the property of their parents. So if this is what the parents want to do, especially if they're relying on healthcare professionals and medical health experts, I don't know what your problem is with that. And then there's several states now permitting minors to access this kind of care. It links out to some scaremongering Fox News story, which says that Oregon allows 15-year-olds and up to consent to medical treatment. And by the way, it's not new. This has been around for a very long time. What they've added on is that now includes the gender-affirming care. So they act like this is something new. It's not like this. They now permit, they've always permitted, but now there are different treatments. All right, let's keep going because there's a lot to get through. The ongoing moral drift is evident in the Christian response to these trends as well. Ooh, scary. A generation ago, we faced backlash for proclaiming that living out a gay or homosexual identity is not God's plan. We grieved as the U.S. Supreme Court redefined marriage in 2015. But today, the front line of moral questioning and challenges to sexual well-being is frequently encountered within the church and Christian homes. As secular opinions continue to reject biblical standards, many Christians struggle to discern what their response should be to such hot-button topics as transgenderism. Again, that's not really the term that we should be using. Christians use it because it makes it seem like a boogeyman. By the way, again, you're the one that's making this a hot-button issue. I don't know why having a different idea of your gender has anything to do with morality. Like, how you feel about your identity is how you feel about your identity. Like, so I'm a cis woman and I have a way of relating to what our culture says women should be, and I take issue with a lot of that. I guess basically I don't see why this is a moral issue. The morality to me would come in how society would force me to be someone that I'm not or be a way that I do not want to be. But since this is about how Christians are changing their mind on sexuality and gender, I think it's a good idea for Christians to change their minds on some issues. They already have changed their minds on issues such as slavery. I mean, the Bible allows for slavery. It tells you how to do slavery, and yet most Christians today, unhappily not all, there are some that will defend it, sadly, but most Christians today will say that slavery is wrong. And they've thrown out a lot of the Old Testament because they say, well, Paul said we didn't need to follow that. But there is so much in that Mosaic law, like we all know it, right? The shellfish and the mixed cloth and all of that. You've thrown out all of that. Why not reevaluate this? And by the way, once again, not a lot in the Bible about being transgender or how you see your gender. Just like, there's not a lot about driving a car or owning a gun or other kinds of things like that. Basically, any sect of Christianity can hold up any collection of verses it wants and say, yep, this is the biblical view. You can make anything you want of the biblical view. All right, let's keep going. Yes, Christianity is moving on, and they should. Come on, get into the 21st century with the rest of us. Next up. Which is it, gender or sex? Changes in the secular culture are also changing our vocabulary. For example, the term gender no longer means male or female. Instead, gender now takes into account identity and expression. According to Healthline.com, there are 64 terms that describe gender. There is even disagreement on the number of biological sexes. The New York Times states that biologically speaking, there are many gradations running from female to male. Along that spectrum lie at least 5 sexes, perhaps even more. While many people talk about sexual orientation, there is no agreement based on legal, medical, or psychological definitions. All right, so yeah, we have a distinction between gender and sex, and we say that sex is the physical attributes. We often think of that as the XY chromosome, and gender is our identity and our expression around that. By the way, this is not a new distinction. It's been around for quite a while. I mean, we've been talking about it forever. Maybe it's new to people at Focus on the Family, but a lot of people have been making a distinction for a very long time. And yes, there are more than the 2 sexes. I know that traditionally male and female because people have mainly just looked at anatomy and said, there we go. But we've known about intersex people for a very long time. And if you ask me, the existence of intersex people throws a wrench into the notion that there was a God that made this perfect creation with male and female. Just that one fact. And it doesn't matter that it is a small portion of the population. Let's say it's 1% of the population. There are 8 billion people on Earth right now. Do that math and you will come up with, that is a big city that you're talking about of people on Earth that are intersex. If you go out and look at the studies on sex, you will find that just from a chromosomal level, this is just chromosomes, people aren't all just X and Y. There are people that have only one X chromosome. It's a broken kind of thing. And they're alive, they exist, they go about the world. I'm not an expert on this, but you can go look this up. I'm not making this up. In addition to the XY, you can do XXY. There are some people that are XXYY. There are others. Again, I'm not an expert. I looked up a Scientific American article, and it's just very interesting that sex is much more complex than we think, and it just gives the lie to the fact that there is only male and female. It's true that we don't have agreement on all of these terms, but here's the thing. Words exist because humans decided that the words exist, and then we have to put boundaries around the words or decide how they overlap. And we have to make an agreement on it. In other words, we have developed language to suit our needs. The words aren't there and then we figure them out. We decide how to wrap words around reality, and different people are going to come up with different ideas. And what we need to do is we need to get thoughtful people who are experts in an area to help refine that vocabulary around the things that exist. So just to wrap this up and not to get too far out on all the tangents, people who work in these areas, whether they work in the biological area or the psychological area, they've decided that we need different words, and they're all coming to conclusions about what those words refer to. And eventually we will come to a consensus, but some of these are relatively new, and we're still refining these things. Okay, let's keep going. Those of us committed to the Christian worldview base our view of gender and sex on the biblical book of Genesis. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Therefore, the Christian worldview on gender and sex takes into account not only the creation of a biological man and a biological woman, but also love, marriage, fidelity, and reproduction. So there you go. That is the one part of the Bible that really addresses gender in any meaningful way. And it's kind of flimsy because when you read it, male and female, he created them. I know we're supposed to understand that there were some that were male and some that were female, but it could also be read as they both had male and female attributes in them. Now, some of this, they come to the conclusion of, the love, marriage, and fidelity part, like where does that come from? The only thing I see is reproduction. There's nothing about them loving each other. This isn't a real marriage. I mean, there are only two beings on earth. There's no ceremony. There's nothing that's like that. There's nothing that says that they're bonded in a way of we think of as marriage. And there's only two of them, so there's no fidelity. I guess they're animals. We won't go there. But there's nothing about fidelity here either. And by the way, the Old Testament is really chock full of men who have lots and lots of wives and concubines and all that kind of stuff. So it's just, to me, ridiculous on its face that you would use this handful of verses and say that's the be-all and end of it. And you won't go and look at your own characters and see how they do not represent this notion. But going back to the different sexes, and I'm just going to go back to intersex people, just as a very simple illustration. Intersex people show that this is incorrect. Unless you want to say, again, male and female can be like in one individual, but then I don't know what we're talking about anymore. The notion that God created this perfectly, and we can show that this is not perfect, that these, just from a chromosomal level, this is wrong, tells me that this doesn't mean anything. And just to drive this all the way home, there's nothing in these lines that say this is supposed to refer to anybody but Adam and Eve, just the first humans. Doesn't say that this is God's plan. That's not articulated at all. There's nothing here about being trans or non-binary, being wrong. Really, people are filling in the blanks from what they want to be the truth. And once again, go look at your own book to see how little they correspond to what is written here and your ideas about love, marriage, and fidelity. All right, let's keep going. What is gender dysphoria? The word dysphoria is a clinical term used for unease or dissatisfaction. Gender dysphoria is the feeling that your emotional and psychological identity doesn't match the biological sex you were born with. There are two types of gender dysphoria. Early onset gender dysphoria involves someone's distress over their sex that begins in early childhood, usually between the ages of 2 and 4. According to Psychology Today, only a small number of children with gender dysphoria will continue to have symptoms in later adolescence or adulthood. Okay, fine. And I find it interesting that they're very happy to lean on the psychology at this point. Let's keep going. Rapid onset gender dysphoria, an increasing social phenomenon, affects teens and adults who have identified with their own biological sex for years, then decide they want to change genders and sometimes alter their bodies. This developmental crisis, seen especially among adolescents, is seemingly associated with peer contagions such as, bullet point 1, social media influencers celebrating the ideology of gender fluidity. Bullet 2, peers embracing transgender behavior as popular and trendy and as an avenue for social celebration or unique recognition. And last bullet, clubs sponsored within public school systems to promote acceptance of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender identity framework. I'm not going to talk about this at length because the science says this is wrong. So here is an article from August 24th, 2023. The headline reads, "Evidence undermines rapid onset gender dysphoria claims." Subhead, fears of social contagion used to support anti-transgender legislation are not supported by science. This is in Scientific American. I'm just going to read a little bit from the article. The American Psychological Association and 61 other healthcare providers' organizations signed a letter in 2021 denouncing the validity of rapid onset gender dysphoria as a clinical diagnosis, and a steadily growing body of scientific evidence demonstrate that it does not reflect transgender adolescence experiences and that social contagion is not causing more young people to seek gender-affirming care. Still, the concept continues to be used to justify anti-trans legislation across the US. I'll link the article in the description below. You can go read the rest of it. But basically, this is a bogus diagnosis to make it seem like scary social media is transing the youth and you don't have control over your children. And this is just not going on. A lot of the work on the rapid onset gender dysphoria area was done by talking to parents of children who had gender dysphoria and having them say that it was a rapid onset. And some of the stuff that I've seen, the parents actually say that the children were doing that for a very long time. It's just the insistence grew as the children grew into adolescence. Now, it is true that people do sometimes discover later. I mean, it would make sense to me that puberty would be a time when a lot of people would start to experience a lot of gender dysphoria because these secondary sexual traits start to emerge, and I think that that could be something that causes people to feel uncomfortable in their bodies. Now, I think it is true that having people's experiences out online, on Instagram or here on YouTube or wherever it is, can get the information to people who need it. They can see their stories in a story that somebody is putting out there. This is not just the case of trans folks. This is the case of all kinds of people on the internet. It's the case of atheists. Why come out here and tell our stories and tell what we think and put our views out and express why we reject certain views, except to get out to other people who need the information or who want the information or who can identify with the information. Trans is just another area where you do need to get the information from somewhere. You can have the feelings and not know what the label is for those feelings. Somebody has to help guide you to that information. Just as an anecdote, I have a friend who is in his 50s and who has discovered that he is trans and has had these feelings his whole life. Now, he's in his 50s, and so anybody who is in their 50s, you might know what the world was like back there in the 70s and 80s to know that this would not have been easy information to get, and the stories just weren't out there in the way they are now, and the information wasn't out there the way it is now. So this is somebody that's discovering today and is now the happiest I've seen this person ever. So the stories are important, and the social media can be a useful means of getting this information. But anyway, to wrap this up, this rapid onset gender dysphoria is not backed by science. Got one more little panel to go before we finish out today. All right, we're back to the text. Certain factors tend to coincide with gender dysphoria. The following conditions are found in greater numbers within the trans population: low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, lack of identity, eating disorders, personality disorder, self-injury, autism spectrum disorder, sexual trauma, gender trauma. You know, I always find it interesting. Religious people really like to talk about all of the mental health challenges that all of the LGBTQ community experience and act like the fact that they are whatever it is along the spectrum here, that is what's causing the mental health challenges. It is not the intersection of that person in society and feeling rejected from society, or to feel like their existence is a sin, or that they're evil for having these quote-unquote temptations. Because they are not accepted for who they are, guess what? They might experience low self-esteem. They might have anxiety because they feel rejected. It might make them depressed. The lack of identity may be that they're feeling these things about their gender or their attractions, and they can't fulfill that part of their identity. Eating disorders are often associated with people who need to feel like they need control over their lives, and eating is a way to get control. I don't know about the personality disorder. Self-injury is another thing like eating disorders. It's a way to control your body. I'm not sure about the autism. And of course, sexual and gender trauma, of course they're going to try to say that because they want to say that people who are trans are broken. And so they experienced some kind of trauma. There's something wrong with them, and it is coming out as a gender identity issue. And that's wrong. I guess the lack of wanting to explore why these things are the case and just jam them all together and say, see, here's a broken person, as opposed to look at why are these things the case and when are they not the case, because guess what? They're not always the case. This whole section wraps up with a story, and it is Sabrina's story. 24-year-old Sabrina was adopted at age 2 from China. Her birth parents had abandoned her on the street soon after her birth, preferring a son who could care for them in their old age. As a young child, she told her adoptive parents that she was a boy. She wanted to cut her hair short and wear boys' clothes instead of dresses. Her dysphoria is understandable considering the enormous trauma she endured as a direct result of her being born a girl into this situation. Now, I have no idea if they made this story up, if this is a real person or whatever. We notice it's communist China, also atheist China, obviously. So this person comes from all of that trauma and the one-child policy in China. And I don't want to get into that whole mess. That's a whole other ethical situation that's a tangent we're not going to go into. But I feel like they're picking that up. Of all the people that they could hold up as an example, they've pulled out a few threads that are going to read a certain way for the audience. What they don't explore in this at all is if Sabrina continues to identify this way. Was this something that she did only as a child? Because that's all they're talking about here. Or is this something that continues and she still wants to live this way? I don't know, given the little anecdote they're providing, what to make of this. But I know what they're trying to communicate. Here was somebody that experienced trauma and they became trans and now we're fixed. And so anybody that's trans, they were traumatized. And once again, they're not going to go to the anecdotes where we see adult trans people who've been living in this identity for like a decade or several decades. No, we're going to go to the sad ones to prop up our story. This is where I'm going to conclude today. And here are just some final thoughts on this first part of the primer on transgender identity. First of all, Focus on the Family really is setting up this notion that they are just providing us with objective information. There are even links out to other sites and everything. Some of those are pretty good and some of those are mediocre and some of them are not good at all. It's a mix of some good information and some not good information. And it's all wrapped up with this nice bow that they are somehow depicting a biblical view when the biblical view really is not very fleshed out for what they're talking about. They have to make up a lot of this because it's just not there in that quote. All right, so this is where I'm going to leave it. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. And while you're there, you can like, subscribe, comment, do all of the YouTube stuff. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. That link is also in the description below. And I will see you in the next one for part 2 of the gender confusion of Focus on the Family. Bye for now.